I have a couple warm-up questions for them, and these are certainly meant to be warm-up questions because if you have ideas or perspectives based on what's been shared over the previous day and a half, by all means, offer them up, because I don't want to make this all about me. But I think you know me well enough to know that if we need to fill the 30 minutes, we can damn well fill the 30 minutes. All right. So I'm going to start with you, Stella, because you presented yesterday, and you also have been, like me, a people analytics leader in role, and you've also been advising companies over the years. So you have seen not only these great use cases and what's worked, but what has not worked. What's been, what have been the prominent struggles. So if you would just offer up, your ideas of what are those struggles, and obviously go to any length you want, but what are just some of the struggles and what are the tidbits that you would recommend to get over those struggles?
So, as with anything, if you try to put it in categories of 3 or in 3 buckets, usually it makes it easier to remember. So let me try to come up with 3 of them because there are plenty. First, I think it's timing. If you bring some analytics solution that necessarily, well, it's interesting to you and you have the passion and maybe you have the data, maybe you have the resources to do it, but it's the wrong time for the organization. I think many times we get frustrated that HR business partners don't want to embrace it, or the leader doesn't want to allocate the budget, or whatever it is, the excuse. And it takes a certain degree of humility to accept that the time is not right and it's not now. Just put it on a shelf and bring it up when the time is right. So that's one challenge that we in analytics community usually run into. The other one is stakeholder engagement, and I think it's so important to bring them up front and have a conversation of what really matters to them, not what the textbook says, not what the methodology says or the consultant who is advising you. It's more about what really the organization needs in the context of everything else that is going on in the industry or in the world of HR, and then based on that determine how can you use analytics to solve that problem, as opposed to saying, well, everybody is doing attrition modeling, let's do it. And the last part is not starting with the business question, it's focusing on HR or analytics questions. When you start with the business and you demonstrate the impact that you're going to have, I think everything else falls into the place.
Well, thanks for that. And Elizabeth, you and I have known each other for a long time, and I know that you've had great ideas to better the employee experience. And also there's constraints put upon you given business priorities. So how do you advocate with executives on, hey, this is why we should do something on behalf of the employee? What's your go-to narrative to help inspire other leaders to make a change?
Yeah, so I'm actually really lucky. So I work in a organization in a space that's technical. It's very data-driven. So the quality of the data that we put out from the laboratory, operations is key to the business's success. So I don't have a hard time selling the value of data. What I do have to work around is how do we get the focus of the importance of the data related to our people to get the same level of attention that our other scientific, what they would consider scientific, data, get that the same attention. And so really what we do is I start small, and I couldn't agree more, and I think it was really well said that it's about timing. And if you bring data that's not relevant about people to the leadership table at the wrong time, then it sort of sets you back even a little bit more than maybe pushing you forward at all. So really being able to answer the questions that are pertinent in the time that you're bringing the data forward is really what I focus on.
Yeah, I love what you're emphasizing there. And just show of hands, if you went to your chief executives, or maybe your chief executive have said this in one form or another, who has a company where their chief executives say your people are your most important asset? Show of hands. Okay, one of the most fun things that I do, actually, I'm going to ask another question. Show of hands. And this is confidential, anonymous, to the extent possible. Who says with high degree of confidence that the behaviors of leadership in terms of what they commission, in terms of employee well-being and engagement and so forth, are in line with that assertion? You follow me? They're actually budgeting and allocating according to that mantra. Show of hands?
2 hands there.
2 hands.
Awesome.
Okay, so that's pretty good. It's a fair amount. I mean, what we've done in past events is the fact that there's commercial priorities is certainly there. You know, obviously business has to make money. At the same time, there's a lot of talk about employees being their most important asset. And just one quick thing, and I'm going to set a question for you too, is one of the most fun things I have when I speak publicly and to a group of executives, I'll ask that very question. Who regards their people as their most important asset? Most everyone will raise their hand. And I say, well, who here has then a people strategy or talent strategy? And you know, they'll usually ask, well, what is that? I'll define it maybe. And most of the hands will go down, but a handful of hands will stay up. And I ask, well, who among you then wants to share how you systematically formulate, measure, and manage that strategy over time? Do you know how many hands have stayed up? Zero. And I hope that changes. I really hope that changes. So my question to you two, and I believe there's hope, I believe we're getting there. So Elizabeth, I'm going to stay with you for a second, because if you're certified, I forgot it, like it's not DISC, but
Insights Discovery.
Insights
Yes.
Discovery. So is that something that you're using now? And if so, how is it being used? But if not, is it just the organization hasn't prioritized it? I mean, what's your feeling around people better understanding themselves so they can better interact with other people?
Yeah, so Insights Discovery, for anyone who's not familiar with it here, it's very similar to a DISC type model. And I'm very passionate about that. I think I've heard it sort of intertwined.
I never noticed. Hey, by the way, before you get it, who has a DISC or Insights type model in your organization that you're utilizing? So a handful. Okay.
Yeah. So Insights is cool. Check it out. But it's been intertwined throughout the couple days here, all about self-awareness, and a lot of this starting with self-awareness. Employee taking control and taking ownership and playing a role in their own development and creating that path, and not leaving it up to the company to tell them what they're going to do. Or to put them in those positions without consultation, right? The data is so important, and I love some of the things that are being done, but I want to hear from the employees too. I want to make sure that what I'm doing is really meaningful to them. And so in order to do that, especially as people are coming into their careers and we're looking at developing high potential employees, they need to understand themselves. And I think you spoke yesterday about your son going to school, your children, and do they know enough about themselves to be able to say no to the things that are not right for them, that are not going to be meaningful and lead them in the direction very intentionally of where they want to be. So these types of tools like Insights, many of them are very, very good, I think are really important to helping people get to know themselves, to understand how they're perceived by other people, where they want to, where they're going to find the most fulfillment in their careers, just based upon who they are and who they've become and who they want to be. So we are using it. We've put our kind of top levels of leadership through it to help with management styles and understanding there. And we are rolling it out in a couple months to our sales team to help with some of their sales techniques and strategies.
Fantastic. And still, I'm going to kick over a question to you. Again, show of hands here. Who believe what Elizabeth just shared is within the realm, or should be within the realm, of people analytics? So this is what I'm getting at. Historically, where did this leadership development, succession planning type activity happen? Was it within a group that was involved with people analytics, or did we just, as professionals, have to deal with it because all of a sudden somebody else made the decision? If I ever asked a leading question, it was that. It was the latter. We had to deal with it. All of a sudden we found out that it was out there. So Stella, and I know you're doing a lot of work around reimagining work, which is in effect the nature of this panel. So as we move forward, we've talked about over the last couple of days about how personal development and organizational development have a relationship. So my question to you is, how do we identify that proper time and place? If we know intuitively or through the data that we're generating that employees are suffering, executives are saying, well, we're not there yet, it's not a priority. How are you going to be ready so when the iron is hot that you're able to act?
And I think that's where the opportunities for the more advanced analytics comes in. So the way I think about analytics is in 3 buckets. One is more of a foundational space where you understand what has happened and what is happening right now. You can detect signals of distress in the organization, and then you can create interventions to, let's say if you have a spike in attrition, then you can look at your hiring experience and see, do you hire and not integrate them fast enough? Maybe the managers are not mature enough. So it's more based on today's data or the past. The second category is more advanced analytics, and this is where you string the data along the employment life cycle. And I intentionally stay away from the word employee only. It's a worker, because we need to be inclusive. Contingent workforce is just as important to the organizational success, and looking at the entire journey, starting from the point where employee or the individual doesn't know anything about your brand, then they decide to, or they discover you, be that on campus or as a customer, then they say, oh, it's a great company, great mission, maybe I come explore what opportunities they have, until they go through the application process, decide to accept your offer, onboard, get benefited, payrolled, developed, annoyed with the manager, move on to the next role, on and on until they quit, and they still have a relationship because they may not recommend their children or their friends to come work for you. So I think the opportunity for analytics is start stringing along the full life cycle, different data sets, and then think how what happens along that life cycle impacts outcomes. And that could be business outcomes, that could be customer outcomes, that could be HR outcomes, and determining the earliest intervention point to make a change. One simple example, right? People don't quit overnight. They quit in paper cuts. So looking at that life cycle and understanding when is the first or earliest series of paper cuts that you can prevent. And as a result, then you, as an HR professional, can make an intervention or a policy change or monitor, do you have 4 managers in a year? Most likely that will be affiliated with one big paper cut. So I think that's where the opportunity to take the next evolution of analytics is. But the more exciting part is more into the realm of research and innovation, and having like a lab environment where you can test some of these new types of data. Can you learn something from sensor data? Can you connect the movement and the number of steps you make a day to your well-being? Sports analytics yesterday was a great example and discussion about that. So it's experimenting with new types of data as well as new types of behavior, and then getting that feedback at the personal level and interventions and little nugs with all the right respect to the ethical use of it and secure and privacy.
So as you're sharing that, I'm thinking, plead guilty on this of my own experience. And so I was leveled as a director at Gap in the early 2000s, yet initially I was 2 layers from the CHRO, then it became, because of my poor performance, 4 or 5, I just got pushed down and I was in the basement. But no, what really happened is I had visibility of things, but it was hard to affect change at a systematic executive level because we were perceived as being tactical. So you might have great ideas, great visibility, but there's not that channel of communication to influence. And that could be on the individual itself, or it could be just systematically it's not regarded or respected or understood enough. So, and I think that's changing as a discipline. I see people, analytics leaders, being elevated to director or VP levels, which is fantastic. When I say people analytics, I'm talking workforce planning as well. So, Elizabeth, one of the reasons I leaned on you to come up and share, and initially, full disclosure, she was reluctant to that. I'm not a people analyst, but I didn't grow up in this. But that was exactly the point. You have been very accomplished in your HR career. You come in, and obviously this big thing called people data and analytics is now influencing the nature of the profession. So how do you learn, and not only for yourself personally, but how do you see other CHROs, if they're trying to acknowledge this and take appropriate action? Do you see within the CHRO community a real eagerness to learn, or is there a defensiveness like, oh, I got my day job, I can't really, deal with this? I mean, what's your position based on what you see? Maybe not just you.
Yeah, I would say it's kind of split. So I think there are going to be some people that I've talked to that are pretty set in their ways. They found success in their organizations. Their HR groups are thriving. They feel their people are thriving. Their general statistics of attrition, things like that, employee satisfaction surveys are all okay, right? They're there. So they're not really focusing on needing to get better in some of these areas. So the idea of a more embedded or complex dive into people analytics isn't at the top of their radar, maybe not understanding how it can add value. And then there are others who crave it, right? Maybe they don't know how to get started into it. This is much like myself. I have a colleague here with me, and I said, I'm going to this conference, it's about data. And she said, you say the word data 10 times a day. I'm like, I know I do. I know. I don't know how to get it, and I'm not sure what to do with it when I have it sometimes, but I want it. And so there are other people that I'm working with, colleagues who crave it in the same manner, but we don't know how to get into it sometimes. We don't know where to start. Some of these baby steps of, we are in a pretty small company, and so we've got technological challenges from a people standpoint. We're really making very intentional and strategic business decisions to invest a lot of capital into our facilities, into our lab equipment, upgrading some of those things. And so, we're working with what we've got from a people standpoint and where we get the data. And I do feel like that's, my network of colleagues is probably split 50-50 for, kind of those reasons. I unfortunately don't work with a lot of people right now or have colleagues that are deep into this right now and really doing some of the exciting, just intriguing things that I'm hearing people here talk about. But I hope it's moving that direction in the marketplace that we're in.
Yeah, it's. I'm going to ask a deep question to you, Stella, jumping off of that, because there are, at least I've seen some reluctance to admit vulnerability among CHROs. Like, what is that? What's AI? What are these chatbots? What is all this stuff? Yet there are those, to your point, that are more willing and open to learn. Where I have found, and where I hear others have found points of connection, is on particular initiatives or problems. And I know you spoke yesterday, Stella, about diversity and inclusion, particularly inclusion. We've talked in the past about creating a sense of belonging at work, which every CHRO is going to perk their ears up and say, can you help me solve that? So what do you advocate in terms of diversity and inclusion and creating that sense of belonging at work?
And I'll give the answer in two parts. So absolutely correct. I think there is a level of change.
I'm a dude.
In two parts.
Take those and I rested. My kids watching?
No. First of all, CHROs feel the pressure, and I have the privilege of being part of some of the council meetings. These are the peer networks that the conference board is organizing, and hear some of the conversation. And that's where they really get vulnerable and open. And for them, having that sense of belonging to a group that is going through the same pains and growth spurts, it's really helpful. And it's interesting to see how different companies start at different spectrum, and some say, I want to be strategic, I want to move fast and make change, and then they conflict with those who want to be tactical, and then they intersect and they swap places. So it's all cyclical. It depends on the economic environment, depends on the labor market, and having the peer network that you can go and reach out to and have a conversation makes the world less scary. So I think this community that is being built right now at PAFOW, it's a perfect example of that type of peer network that you can always lean on and say, hey, I've heard you've done that. How can I learn from you?
Quick question for the group. Who here is part of a peer network? Show of hands. Stacy, you in the room?
Opportunities abound.
No, I couldn't agree more. It's how I learned initially. It's, I think, and I say that in jest. If you're trying to do this alone, it's a lonely job. It sucks, and your probability of failure and frustration is extraordinarily high. And there's a host of accomplished people and leaders that I believe will echo that. I say a host of professionals who would echo that. So I'm sorry.
And then the second part is on the topic of diversity and inclusion. And as analytics practitioners, there's always this, expectation from us to slice and dice everything we have by different demographic categories. And I remember one day our chief diversity officer came and said, well, do you remember the dashboard and all of these great things that you've done for diversity? Can you do the same for inclusion? It's like, well, let's have a conversation. How do you define that? And that was the first pause. And then, of course, it took a little bit of research and studying and thinking and experimenting with data and looking at the network and how people interact with each other and behaviors on teams that creates a sense of inclusion as opposed to diversity. And that's where the light bulb went off. And I think the topic of inclusion stood with me for a very long time. And it is translating really well now in one of my passions, the nonprofit that I've started last year, Amazing Community. It's focused on women over 50 and helping them prepare for the skills of the future. And it really, at the core, is about inclusion, creating a workplace where anyone, regardless of the age, can participate. And while we're starting with women, mostly because they are one of the most experience the biggest challenges re-entering the workforce. It's about everybody. It's about creating a workplace where without men you cannot help women, without younger generations you cannot help older. So it has to be an intergenerational conversation and solutions that help address that, and that spans how you design your workplace, both digital and physical. As you age, your eyesight goes, your hearing goes, your ability to move maybe as fast diminishes. How can you design the physical environment in a way that allows you to continue to stay active and productive? As you age, some of these apps that are designed by kids for kids also require a lot more accessibility features. So how can you integrate that and include people with different abilities? I call those diverse abilities, not disabilities. Into your design process. And by solving some of these design issues for those smaller segments, everybody else can contribute and benefit out of it. Just think about the ramps for disabled people on streets. Yeah. Bikers use it, people on with stroller, men, parents with strollers. There's a bigger benefit to the society. So that applies not only to the physical environment and digital environment, that applies to how you create urban spaces to create more sense of belonging and community for not just work organizations, but for cities and areas we live in. That also applies to policymaking, including different voices that are typically not heard in some of the decision making. So it doesn't benefit only the certain stakeholders, and I was really encouraged by the news that was mentioned a couple of times in the conference that the Business Roundtable, so these are 181 CEOs, declared that the purpose of the organization is no longer just shareholder value. You need to include customers, you need to include investments in employees, you need to include your suppliers and how you treat them, you need to include the community that you operate in, and then the long-term shareholder value, which is a very different, dramatic change. And I think it's going to create so many opportunities for us in HR and analytics to figure out what that is and how you measure it and how you make impact and change.
Absolutely. Love it all. Yeah. As we start to wrap up, Elizabeth, how would you advise? I mean, most of the people in the room are people, analytics professionals in one form or another, or they're customers or suppliers of data that influence upwards. How would you recommend we try and influence chief people officers like yourself? What narratives do you want to hear?
It's not hard to influence me, so I'm trying to figure out for other people. I'm easily sold on this. So, I think it's really helping how to get started and how to layer in the technologies. It does feel really overwhelming, to know where to start. Somebody yesterday was mentioning they're also with an organization that doesn't have an HRIS system yet. We also don't have an HRIS system just yet. So the data that we're pulling is, it's there. There's data there. It's accessible. But, we start to get, offers of this really great, super sexy, technology that's out there, but where do I start? What's the right one to do first? And how is that then going to be scalable? Because the timing's not right for us as an organization to, go full scale on this. But where do I get in at the ground level so that as the organization continues to grow, as the capital investment that can be made in our group grows, how can I grow the technology that I have and know that I've started at the right place? Because I also think that's going to help me sell that to, our CEO and, the rest of the leadership team. So I think, help with that, genuine, transparent help with, where's the right place to start.
And correct me if I'm wrong, the narrative that you have to have should be very assertive and clear so you're not overly guided by vendors who want to sell you something. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Stella, any closing thoughts? Recommendations?
The most exciting part about the future, and looking at the landscape and how the technology is changing who we are and what it means to be human in the 21st century, augmented and data-informed and driven, and it's really exciting time to be alive. I think it's also an amazing time for HR practitioners in general to be part of that conversation and actually shape it in the way that is bringing more humanity to the digital world. And that could be, asking the right question about the data that was selected to train an algorithm, or making sure people, different voices are included in that conversation, making sure there's a human centricity that is brought to the employee experience. And I couldn't agree more with everything that Ian said earlier about all of the design thinking skills that HR really needs to bring into what we do. So I think it's a great time. I think the profession in general is changing, and you all have the ability to make that change and shape it.
Well, again, thank you both for making the effort to be here and share your insights and ideas. If you would help me.
Thank you.
You guys, okay?